Welcome to Just Settled. On this week's episode of the podcast, we have an incredible attorney here in Pasadena, Michael Carrillo. He is a sexual abuse and civil rights attorney. Welcome to Just Settled, Michael, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You and I were kind of discussing a very interesting case that I wanted to ask you some questions about today, and thank you for joining us for this. I guess I'll just kind of dive right into it. How did you first learn about the shooting case, and what were your initial thoughts?
I first heard about this incident through the news, actually. I had heard that a school resource officer, which is essentially a rent-a-cop with a gun, had shot and seriously injured a little 18-year-old girl. And so my initial thoughts were, I feel for the child, for the young person, for the family. I'm sure they're going through a lot, and it just it caught my attention, this case, from the get-go.
Okay, yeah, that's obviously some very serious subject matter to be dealing with. What was the family going through? Can you kind of speak to how the family was dealing with that and just that type of thing for this?
I mean, the family was shook from the moment that they heard that something had happened with Mona, which is what they called her. Her real name was Manuela, but they called her Mona. Then they found out that she's in the hospital, and then they find out that essentially she's on life support, and only breathing, only living through machines. So they have, from the get-go, have gone through something so traumatic, because then the doctors are telling the family that, they'd like to harvest the organs. And, the family goes from one moment worrying about Mona and her child, because she had a young child at home, to, hey, are we going to give her organs away and she's going to die? So the family held on to a lot of hope that, Mona would recover from this. But when you get shot with hollow point bullets in your head at such a close range, it wasn't very hopeful. We tried to help manage the family's expectations, but they were just going through so much trauma from this incident.
Wow. I can't even imagine. When the family hired you, what exactly were they looking for? I guess, what was their sort of expectation when they first came to you with this?
I mean, they were looking for justice, and they wanted answers. They wanted to know how this happened. So it wasn't really, at that time, and it's still not at this time, about money. It was about what occurred, who's responsible, and holding those people responsible. Luckily, this man, this Eddie Gonzalez character, was charged, and he faces charges still to this day. But the family from the get-go was looking for justice and for answers, and really for us to guide them through the legal process. They never had to hire a lawyer. They never knew what to do or who to turn to. So we wanted to guide them through that process, and I'm glad that we were there throughout this entire case.
Can only imagine that how much they were relying on you and everything to get that justice for them. What were some of, I guess, like the typical opposition or obstacles that you encountered in this case? And then I guess, were there like unique challenges that were more unpredictable or just, particular to this case that maybe you had not confronted before?
As always the case with insurance companies, school districts, and lawyers that represent them, it's all about delay justice, delay information as best they could, which is exactly what they did here. Some of the unique challenges presented were that this shooting officer, Eddie Gonzalez, had worked for prior police departments, and we tried to get that information about, well, why was he just let go on probation from the other departments? Why would Long Beach Unified even hire him after he had been let go from 2 previous police departments? It made no sense to us. So those were some of the challenges we had. We had a great team. It wasn't just me. It was me, my father, and 2 other astounding lawyers, civil rights lawyers, that worked together on this. And we dealt with a lot of challenges, but ultimately came out with a successful conclusion to provide some closure for this family.
That's good to hear. I mean, obviously, in such a sad, tragic case, there's not much good to hear, but obviously that is good to hear that they at least had, very credible, strong attorneys helping them. Can you kind of briefly outline the timeline of this case, just kind of from start to finish? How did that work in this particular case?
So Mona was shot September 27th, 2021. She was on life support for a couple days after that until the family had to make that horrific decision to donate her organs and allow other people to live. From there, we, immediately took the fight to the Long Beach Unified. And just recently, we settled that case for $13 million for the benefit of Mona's mother and also for the benefit of Mona's child, who is still with us and who now is about 2 years old. So he's got a long life ahead of him. And unfortunately, he won't have his mother around to care for him. But luckily, he has a strong family support now. And so the civil case is wrapped up, but the criminal case still proceeds forward against this Eddie Gonzalez, who faces involuntary manslaughter charges.
At what point did you realize that a settlement here, you mentioned the settlement amount, which obviously was very substantial, but it's a horrible, horrible case. When did you realize that that was likely as opposed to going into like a full trial on this?
From the beginning, the lawyers for the district reach out to us and talk settlement. Usually we take that with a grain of salt because it's usually, they want to do things on their way, their terms, and for low amounts. But with something so traumatic, something so highly publicized that was caught on video as well from a variety of angles, which shows Eddie Gonzalez shooting at a moving car that's going away from him as if he's like a cops and robbers. We didn't know what to do with that information. We kept fighting, and ultimately, the district came to its senses through their lawyers, contacted us, and we finally worked. Myself, my father Luis, Arnaldo Casillas, Robin Perry, 4 lawyers worked to prepare this case for a mediation, where ultimately they decided that they would settle the case. I'd say pretty early on, but still, the family had to go through a lot to get to this point.
In terms of the negotiations with the opposing counsel, how did that process unfold? Did the defendant, in this case, obviously the district, did they attempt to minimize what happened in any way? And I mean, I can't even imagine that they'd even make that attempt, but who knows? And then how did you advocate for your client's interest in this case and just make sure you guys knew that you were going to get what was, obviously deserved here? It's never going to make up for it, but get such a substantial settlement. How did that negotiation sort of back and forth go?
Well, in any case, the school district tries to come up with some defense, and we've all heard of frivolous cases. Well, in this case, it was a frivolous defense, and what we heard in this case is that the school district was essentially arguing that our client, who had some interaction with some high school student from Long Beach Millikan High School, the local high school outside where this occurred, there was an argument, some hair pulling, etc. And the district tried to say, well, she beat up a girl and she was the bad one. She was doing bad things. And that should not and should ever justify somebody using deadly force on someone as they're going away from them and not a threat. So that was one of the discussions. The second discussion was, well, maybe Officer Gonzalez feared for his life because the occupants of the car were driving away. But the science is there, and you can't dispute science. And the science will show that the bullet holes entered through the back of the headrest and the side of the vehicle as Mona, who was a passenger in the car, and the driver, her boyfriend, drove away. So this was a case of frivolous defenses, in my opinion. And that's what we were able to overcome for the family. And luckily we spared them. We didn't tell them the brutal details of what the district was trying to do because, we were trying to get some closure. And I think that's what we were able to do for them.
What was the final outcome? I mean, you mentioned that the settlement amount. How, obviously, something again like this, so traumatic, such a tragedy, there's no fixing this, but how, you mentioned she did have a small child, obviously, a baby. How did the closure of it all and getting some restitution and this person being held accountable, how did that positively impact the family's life and just kind of give them some sense of closure? And just, if you can speak to that a bit, that would be, I think, good for us to know.
So putting the family through these depositions was a hard process. They had to talk about their love for Mona, what her child will be missing for the rest of his life. So putting this case to rest was great for them. Obviously, they're still looking for some closure in the criminal process, and they hope that this Eddie Gonzalez gets convicted and sentenced for many years. But, as great as the amount is, as great as a financial support it is, that they would give it all back, every single penny, for one more day with Mona. And I don't just say that because it sounds good. This is truly what the family believes and what they would want. Mona was a bright, shining, beautiful asset to their family. I wish I got to meet her, because the way they make her sound, she's so beautiful and loving and loved by her family. So it did provide some closure. We're hopeful for the second part in the district attorney's office to get that justice in the criminal context, but to allow her son to have some financial support, for what his mom went through, that helps.
Thank you for joining us today, Michael, on Just Settled. We really do appreciate having you here, and thank you for walking us through this case. It's terrible, just traumatic case, but again, it's amazing that there's attorneys like you out there fighting for civil rights and to protect people. Again, we just can't thank you enough for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I appreciate it.